I wasn't even planning to be out that late, but the evening just felt peaceful, so I stayed. There's this little spot near where I live, barely more than a water-filled ditch that folks around here call a fishing hole. It's off a quiet back road, tucked behind some trees, and if you didn't already know it was there, you'd probably drive right past it. I had just packed up for the night and was sitting in my car, scrolling through my phone to post some pictures of the fish I caught. Nothing impressive, a couple catfish, maybe a bluegill or two, but I was feeling good about the evening. Then I looked up and noticed a truck parked right next to me. I have no idea how long they'd been sitting there. It was one of those lifted pickups with a rack over the bed, the kind you might use for hauling gear or maybe even cages if you're into trapping or coon hunting. The guy riding passenger was looking straight into my window, this strange half-smile on his face that didn't match the vibe of someone who just wanted to say hey. He looked like every stereotype of a backwoods good old boy, thick neck, scruffy beard, mullet halfway tucked into his camo hoodie. I didn't see the driver at all, which somehow made it worse. My gut didn't scream danger, but something in the back of my head started ringing like a bell. The guy didn't make a move or wave or try to get my attention. He just stared. I sat there for a second, unsure if I should roll the window down or just drive off. In the end, I chose to leave, easing out onto the road and circling around them like I was in no particular hurry. I didn't even look back. Instead of going straight home, I turned off into a nearby lot and just sat there for a while, looking around to make sure I wasn't being followed. After a few minutes, I doubled back to the fishing spot just to check if the truck was still there, but they were gone. It would have been easy to write it off as someone being weird, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I'd made the wrong move, something bad could have gone down. The reason this whole thing hit me so hard is because of what happened years ago, something that's stuck with me ever since. I was still a teenager then, fishing under a bridge at night, a pretty well-known spot back in the day. Two older guys pulled up and came over like they wanted to chat or maybe fish. Seemed normal enough. I was just sitting on the seawall with my legs hanging over the edge when one of them suddenly shoved me into the water. Just like that. They grabbed my rod and tackle box and took off in their car. The fall wasn't too far, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but I couldn't climb back up right where I'd fallen in. Had to swim around until I could drag myself out. My phone and smokes were ruined, and I couldn't call my mom, who was supposed to pick me up later. I ended up just sitting there soaking wet until she showed up. She was furious until she saw the look on my face. What stuck with me wasn't the fact that they stole my gear. It was the way they did it, with no hesitation or care about what might have happened to me. I could have hit my head. I could have drowned. And it was all for what? A $50 rod and some cheap tackle? Ever since then, I've kept my guard up, especially when I'm out at night and alone. So when that truck rolled up on me tonight, every instinct I've developed since that night kicked in. I don't know what those guys wanted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were just curious. Or maybe I dodged something worse. I guess I'll never know. But I'm glad I didn't find out the hard way. Back in 2009, right after a messy breakup with my long-term girlfriend, I was in a pretty low place. We'd made the move from Calgary to a suburb just outside Toronto for her job, and after things fell apart between us, we ended up stuck living in the same apartment for a while. Things got tense fast, walking on eggshells, barely speaking, both of us pretending it wasn't driving us crazy. Around that time, a classmate I'd gotten close with invited me out for a weekend of camping and fishing near the outskirts of Hamilton, and I didn't hesitate for a second. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't have shared furniture and awkward silences. He took me out to this area near Waterdown, mostly forest, scattered farmland, and a winding creek that runs through the brush. His uncle used to bring him out there when he was younger, so he knew the land like the back of his hand. We parked near a clearing at the edge of a wide cornfield, probably private property, but there weren't any fences or signs, so we figured it was fair game. The two of us set up camp along the creek bank, made a fire, and spent the night sipping IPAs, catching a couple of smallmouth bass, and just unwinding. It had that calm, late spring vibe, warm air, crackling fire, and that good tired feeling you get after a full day outside. We turned in sometime after midnight, both tucked into a two-man tent with nothing more than sleeping bags and bug spray between us and the dark woods. My buddy passed out pretty quickly, but I lay there messing around on my phone until the battery died. Not long after I started drifting off, I was pulled halfway back to consciousness by this weird, sharp yelping sound. At first, I thought it was some kind of fox or coyote, something high-pitched and frantic, like it was either calling out or injured. I didn't think much of it and figured it would pass, but it kept going, over and over, and it was definitely getting louder. Eventually, it sounded like whatever it was had crept right up near the tent. I started getting nervous, not panicked, but that creeping sort of unease you can't quite explain. I'd seen coyotes before in the West, skittish, skinny, usually more scared of people than anything else. But I didn't like the idea of one wandering right into our camp. I gave my friend a nudge, and he mumbled something like, "You hearing that too?" He was awake now, and we both sat up, listening to that noise just outside. We had no weapon, no bear spray, nothing even remotely useful if it turned out this thing wasn't friendly. He said he'd shine the flashlight and make some noise to try to scare it off. I sat there holding my breath while he slowly unzipped the tent flap and aimed the beam into the dark. He didn't yell. He didn't even say anything at first. He just kind of stumbled backward into the tent, eyes wide, like he'd just seen something he couldn't wrap his head around. All he could get out was, "It's not an animal. It's a guy." And not in a casual, "oh, it's just a hiker" kind of way. His voice cracked, and he looked absolutely rattled, which threw me into full panic mode. The noise was still going, but now that I was fully awake, it sounded wrong. It wasn't an animal at all. It was some man making those yipping sounds, like he was trying to mimic a coyote or something. Against every instinct I had, I leaned forward and peeked out through the tent flap. There he was. A man standing just a few feet from us, rocking slightly on his heels, wearing a tank top, a ball cap, and I swear to God, women's lingerie, lace and all, over his pants. Just standing there in the dark, looking in our direction, yipping like some kind of deranged animal. I pulled back into the tent and felt my heart banging against my ribs. I could barely breathe. My buddy and I just looked at each other for a second, both of us frozen, before we started whispering about what to do. He finally shouted, "Hey man, get the hell out of here!" And just like that, the sound stopped. No more yipping, no breathing, no footsteps. It went dead quiet. Then we heard him sprint toward the tent, heavy, fast, like he was charging full speed. And then silence again, right outside. I felt like my brain couldn't keep up with what was happening. We both started yelling, full volume. "We've got phones. The cops are on their way. Leave now." And just like that, the footsteps moved off, crunching through the grass toward the road. We didn't sleep after that. We just laid there, clutching our phones with no service and waiting for the sun to rise so we could pack up and leave. On the way back, we kept talking about it, both of us still amped up, but also kind of embarrassed at how freaked out we got. It wasn't exactly a proud survival moment. And honestly, we've barely mentioned it since. I still think about it though. That guy wasn't just wandering around for fun. He came there with a purpose. And I still get this awful feeling that he was waiting to see who was inside that tent. I don't know what he was planning to do, and I never want to find out. One summer night a few years back, my friends and I decided to head out to this old gravel pit lake where people used to go for catfishing. The spot had kind of a reputation, solid fishing, but also kind of forgotten, barely any lighting, and not much traffic late at night. We brought a cooler full of beer, folding chairs, and some firewood to make a little night of it. There were 4 of us, me, another guy, and 2 girls we'd known since high school. Everything was laid back, just the kind of mellow night you need after a long work week. I wandered off a bit into the brush to collect some extra wood for the fire while the others hung out by the shoreline. My buddy was laser-focused on the rods, puffing away on a cigarette, and the girls were joking around off to the side, stepping behind some bushes for a quick bathroom break. The fire crackled steady, and the beer was hitting just right. And then, from out of nowhere, this man stepped into the ring of firelight like he'd been there the whole time, just waiting for the right moment to show himself. No flashlight, no noise, just casually strolling in like he owned the place. The guy didn't say much at first. He had this quiet, measured way of moving that made everything feel weirdly calculated. My buddy wasn't giving him the time of day, just kept an eye on him without saying a word. I, on the other hand, felt the need to fill the silence, so I threw out some awkward chatter about the catfish bite and the weather, hoping to steer the conversation somewhere normal. He barely reacted, gave a couple of slow nods like he wasn't even really hearing what I said, and never once looked at the girls, who were now sitting frozen, wide-eyed behind me. Then, out of the blue, he pulls out this big, dull-looking hunting knife from a sheath on his belt and starts running his thumb along the blade. Not like he was threatening us, but like it was a nervous habit or something. That's when everything in our little group shifted. My friend went dead quiet, stood up, and started gathering our things without saying anything. He gave me this look that said, "We're done here." The stranger turned around and wandered off into the dark just as calmly as he arrived. The ride back was dead silent for a while, until we were about halfway home, and that's when my buddy finally told me what was up. Apparently, he and his wife had seen that same guy once before at the same lake. They'd kept it casual the first time too, some light talk and nothing more. But when they went into town to grab snacks that night, they noticed him following them around the store. Not tailing them, obviously, but moving through the same aisles at the same time, watching but not saying a word. That had clearly messed with them more than they'd let on. Ever since that second encounter, the whole night has replayed in my head more than I care to admit. There was something unspoken in that guy's body language, like he wasn't just wandering by, like he was looking for something. I got this deep-rooted sense that he had some inner narrative playing out in his head that we were all unknowingly a part of. He didn't say much, but it felt like he was sizing us up, running through possibilities. I don't like making assumptions about people, but everything about him screamed danger. The cold stare, the way he gripped that knife, the emotionless way he watched us. It felt rehearsed, like he'd done this before. To this day, I'm convinced we weren't just imagining the threat. Back when my kids were still little and I was carving out quiet moments for myself whenever I could, I used to sneak away in the evenings with my rod and tackle box and head to this lake that was popular with local fishermen. It wasn't too far from town, but parts of it felt pretty secluded depending on where you set up. That particular evening, my usual spot was already packed with about a dozen people, so I wandered a little farther down the shore where it was quieter and more overgrown. I followed this narrow dirt path that led to a ledge, about 8 feet down from the top, where I could sit on a flat rock partially hidden by tall grass and bushes. It was peaceful there, just me, the water, and the occasional ripple from fish teasing the bait. Not too long after I got settled, I heard footsteps crunching along the path behind me. I figured someone else was just scouting for a better fishing hole, but instead of continuing past, this guy stops right at the top of the trail and starts talking to me. At first, he seemed harmless enough, kind of chatty, with a voice that stuck in your head, low and raspy, like he smoked too much. He perched himself near the top of the trail and slowly edged closer, until he was just a few feet behind me. I didn't mind it at first, thought he was just being friendly, but then the tone shifted. He started saying some weird things about how he was coming down from something, drugs or whatever, and made a gross comment about looking for sex. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he asked if he could come sit with me. Right there, on my rock. I told him flat out, no way, while pretending to fiddle with my gear. He tried asking again, like maybe I'd change my mind. That's when I made a show of picking up my fillet knife to swap out lures, even though I had nail clippers in my pocket that could have done the job faster. I wasn't threatening him, but I wasn't being subtle either. That seemed to shut him up, and he eventually climbed back up the path without another word. I figured that was the end of it. But maybe 10 minutes later, as I'm retying my line and starting to relax again, I hear him. Same raspy voice, now coming from just above me, and he says something so vulgar I froze. He was standing near the top of the trail, saying out loud that he was going to take care of himself right there, like it was no big deal. I was furious and scared all at once, so I raised my voice and started yelling loud enough for the nearby anglers to hear, telling him to zip up and leave before I called the cops. It didn't seem to faze him. He just sauntered back to his car and drove away like nothing happened. By the time I climbed up to try and get his plate number, he was gone. The whole thing left me rattled, and I packed up and went straight home. My husband took it seriously when I told him, and he convinced me to call the police. I gave them as much detail as I could, what the guy looked like, what kind of car he was driving, and especially that creepy, unmistakable voice. They took down the info, but didn't seem hopeful. For a while, I tried to convince myself that would be the last I'd ever see of him. But a couple weeks later, while at the grocery store with my kids, I heard that same voice again. It was just a few aisles away, but there was no mistaking it. My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed my kids, ditched the cart, and rushed out to the parking lot where we sat in the car until I saw him walk out. I managed to catch his license plate this time and called it in. Turns out he lived not far from us, probably somewhere nearby all along. The cops followed up, but they weren't exactly encouraging. They said the guy they talked to didn't match my description completely because his haircut was different, like that couldn't have changed in a week or two. They admitted the voice could have been the same, but nothing else came from it. After that, I stopped going to that lake alone. I still fish sometimes, but only when someone came with me. The whole experience left me uneasy for years, and I don't think I ever looked at solo outings the same way again. Last summer, over the 4th of July weekend, my family decided to spend a few days out by the coast. We rented a couple rooms at a beachside hotel about an hour away and packed the weekend with boardwalk food, sandcastles, and as much sun as we could soak up. It was me, my husband, our kids, my brother and his family, and my grandparents. We were trying to recreate the big family trips we used to take when we were younger. One of those nights, someone had the bright idea to drive out to this nearby pier for some night fishing, which sounded fine at the time, until the little one started yawning and getting whiny. I offered to take all the kids back to the car so the rest of the group could keep fishing without distraction. Now, it's probably worth mentioning, I'm a small woman, not petite in a fashionable way, more like. People mistake me for a teenager more than I'd like. I'm also one of those people who's always aware of her surroundings, maybe to a fault. Growing up around guns and living out in the sticks made me cautious, especially after having kids. My husband keeps a compact handgun in the center console for emergencies, which I normally forget about, but not that night. I was in the driver's seat with the engine running, AC humming softly, and the kids half asleep in the back watching a DVD. There were a few other vehicles scattered around, but it wasn't exactly crowded. A dark SUV was parked to our right. and it had been there when we pulled in. Not long after we got settled, a small pickup rolled into the spot on the other side of the SUV, and two men climbed out. They were pulling fishing gear from the bed, but the way they kept glancing in my direction gave me pause. It wasn't just a glance or two. They'd pull something out, look over, talk to each other quietly, then keep staring like they were trying to decide something. Eventually, they walked off toward the pier, but they'd been at their truck way too long to just be organizing tackle. My husband checked in with a call, and I told him about the two guys. He reminded me, calm as ever, about the gun and where it was. I took his advice and slid it out, making sure it was within arm's reach. About 10 minutes passed before those same two guys returned, which caught me off guard. If they'd even made it all the way to the end of the pier, I'd be surprised. Fishing takes time, and they didn't have any rods when they came back. That was enough to crank my internal alarm up. I quietly rested the pistol on my lap and kept my eyes forward. The two of them were back at their truck, but every few seconds, one or both of them would peek around the SUV, clearly trying to get a better view of me or the car, or maybe the kids. It wasn't just idle glancing either. They'd look, lean back, mutter something, then look again. Eventually, one of them stepped around the back of the SUV and stood there like he was trying to figure out what to do next. I met his stare, picked up the gun a bit higher where he could clearly see it resting across my hands, and gave him a little wave. It wasn't friendly. It was more like, "You have 10 seconds to go the other direction." He turned right around and mumbled something to the other guy. A few seconds later, they both climbed into their truck and drove off without another glance. I didn't wait around after that. I got on the phone, told my husband we were done fishing for the night, and within minutes we were packed up and heading back to the hotel. I still have no clue what those guys were after, whether it was me, the car, or something else entirely. But I'm glad I trusted my gut that night. Not everyone at the fishing pier is there for the fish. There's this little jetty by the river where I usually fish with a buddy of mine. It's not much, but it's quiet, peaceful, and usually free of drama. On this particular day, my friend couldn't make it out, so I figured I'd just go alone, cast a few lines, maybe unwind a bit. When I got there, I noticed a young girl already sitting at the end of the jetty. Out of respect, I started heading toward the beach to set up there instead, but she called out and told me it was totally fine if I joined her. Apparently, she'd seen me out there before and said she was hoping someone would show up so she wasn't sitting there by herself. I was halfway through unpacking my gear when this guy walks up in what I first assumed was a police uniform. He didn't say much to me at first. His attention was all on the girl. The way he started talking to her didn't sit right with me. He was asking her about someone supposedly riding a dirt bike through the park and throwing around words like apprehend, like he was on some action movie mission. But when I actually looked at his uniform closely, I realized it wasn't even a cop outfit. He was wearing a modified state emergency service getup, which is completely different. Not long after that, my fishing buddy finally showed up, and the whole scene quickly went from uncomfortable to weirdly surreal. This guy was clearly trying to sound official, but half the stuff he was saying made no sense, and he kept tripping over his own story. I decided to start recording a video just in case something came of it, and it's a good thing I did. A few minutes later, the guy with the dirt bike actually came back. MOB, as we started calling him, short for Marine Officer Badass, tried to act like he had some kind of authority and got completely shut down by the biker, who told him off in no uncertain terms. After that embarrassment, MOB strutted back to the jetty, whipped out his phone, and pretended to call the police, reporting a bunch of things that never actually happened. Then, out of nowhere, he announced he was going to fish too, rode off on this tiny bike of his, and returned shortly after in regular clothes, like nothing ever happened. The girl, who up until then had seemed pretty relaxed, suddenly got real chatty with us in a way that made it clear she didn't feel okay with him being so close. She kept making comments like, "Don't leave me alone here," and there was something about her voice that made me really uneasy. MOB sat way too close to her and was pretending to be casual, but it was clear he was trying to insert himself into her space. Eventually, she said she was ready to leave, and just like that, he got up and said he'd walk with her, like that was expected. She hesitated and stuck around to talk to us instead, while he slowly started pushing his bike away, glancing back every few steps. The whole thing was tense and uncomfortable, so we didn't leave her side. We ended up walking her home, just to make sure she got there safe. When we were saying goodbye, her phone rang. Turns out it was her mom, confused and angry, saying she got a call from some man claiming her daughter was heading home with 2 older men she didn't know. That's when it hit us. While she wasn't paying attention, this creep must have gone through her phone and taken her mom's number. We later learned he wasn't connected to any emergency service and had a history of pretending to be someone he's not. Someone posted about him online, and people started coming forward. Apparently, a few months earlier, fireworks exploded on his porch while kids were nearby, and a young girl got seriously burned. The fact that he was this comfortable acting the way he did right in front of us makes me wonder how many others didn't have someone around to step in. Since then, my friend and I have made it a bit of a routine to show up at that jetty more often than we normally would, just to make sure that girl, or anyone else, doesn't get stuck with a predator in disguise.